I want you to try a little visualization exercise with me, just for a second.
Yeah.
If you can, obviously, not if you're driving or something, but close your eyes and just picture a modern city.
Okay. I'm doing it.
So what's the first thing that hits your mind? Like, what do you actually see?
Well, I mean, I see the skyline, right? Glass, steel, maybe a big grid of traffic lights down below. I hear the sirens, lots of crowds.
Right. And that's the classic postcard view. It's very static. But I want to completely shift the lens here, because in the research we're diving into today, specifically this paper called The Blueprint for Resilient and Sustainable Urban Growth, they ask us to stop looking at the city as just, a collection of buildings. They want us to start looking at it as an organism.
Like a living thing.
Yeah, a massive hungry beast. It wakes up every morning, it demands gigawatts of energy, it drinks millions of gallons of water, it consumes literal tons of food, and then, to put it politely, it excretes just a staggering amount of waste.
It's a really powerful metaphor because it changes the stakes immediately. We aren't just talking about architecture here or zoning laws. We're talking about the metabolism of the place where more than half of humanity currently lives.
Exactly. And that is really the core mission for this deep dive. We are looking at the challenges of urban sustainability, but we're trying to answer a specific, almost medical question, I guess. How do we keep this massive organism from just collapsing under its own weight?
And perhaps more importantly, how do we stop it from eating its own habitat? Because that's really what the source material is warning us about over and over again.
Right. So before we get into the grim realities of, smog and traffic jams, we probably need to baseline our terms a bit.
Yeah.
The word sustainability, it's such a buzzword now.
Oh, totally.
Corporations use it, politicians use it.
But in the context of urban geography and this research, what are we actually saying? Well, it's easy to get cynical about the word, right? You see a recycling bin in a corporate lobby and you think, oh, great, sustainability, problem solved. But the academic definition in the blueprint is much more rigorous. Urban sustainability is about resource management with a very, very long timeline.
Okay.
It's basically meeting the needs of the current population. So that's housing, jobs, transport, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs.
So it's not just about being green today. It's about longevity.
Exactly.
It's about making sure the fridge isn't totally empty 50 years from now when our grandkids, want to throw a party.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And the metric we use to measure this, and this is a really key concept from your reading, is the ecological footprint.
Yeah. Okay. This was the first place where my intuition was just dead wrong. Because I always assumed the footprint of a city was just the city limits, like the actual square mileage on the map.
Right, but that's just the physical footprint. The ecological footprint is completely different. It's a calculation of the total amount of productive land and water required to basically support that city's entire lifestyle.
Oh, wow. So we're talking about the land to grow the wheat for the sandwiches, the forests to absorb the carbon from the city buses, the physical space to bury the trash.
All of it. Everything. And here's the real kicker. As a city becomes wealthier and more developed, that footprint just explodes. So a city might physically occupy, say, 200 square miles, but its ecological footprint could easily be the size of an entire state. It's drawing resources from thousands of miles away.
Which means the city isn't just a local phenomenon at all. It's a global drain.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the first symptom of this footprint getting totally out of control is something we can see without even looking at a spreadsheet. We literally just have to look out the window of a car.
Sprawl.
Suburban sprawl, yes.
Yeah, this section of the research hit really close to home for me because I think a lot of us listening live this exact reality. We don't live in the downtown city center. We live out in the burbs. But the text defines sprawl as something very specific. It's unplanned, low-density expansion.
Yes. Unplanned is the operative word there. It's not just a city getting bigger in a smart way. It's a city linking outward. And there is a very interesting economic principle driving this called the bid-rent theory.
I loved this concept because it explains why we, drive until we qualify for a mortgage. Break that down for us.
Sure. So it's basically a massive trade-off between price and accessibility. In the city center, what planners call the central business district land is incredibly scarce, so the price is astronomical.
Right, only skyscrapers and giant tech corporations can afford to be there.
Exactly. But as you move away from that center, the price of the land drops significantly.
It's like an inverse curve. The further I drive, the cheaper the dirt gets.
Right. So if you are a developer wanting to build affordable houses, or you're a family wanting a big backyard for the dog, the math essentially pushes you outward. You trade your time, meaning your commute, for physical space.
But that trade-off only works if you actually can commute.
And that's where the automobile and the interstate highway system come in. They were the absolute catalysts for this. I mean, before the car, you couldn't realistically live 30 miles from your job. The car artificially lowered the cost of distance. It made sprawl financially and practically feasible.
And now we just view it as a standard lifestyle choice. Like, I want the quiet neighborhood, I want the good school district. But the sources paint a pretty dark picture of the aggregate cost of millions of people making that exact same choice.
It's the classic tragedy of the commons. Individually, moving to the suburbs makes total sense. Collectively, it's an ecological disaster. First, obviously, you have the emissions from everyone driving 2 hours a day in stop-and-go traffic. But think about the land itself. Cities usually start near really good farmland. That's why they were founded there historically.
Right, they pop up next to rivers on fertile soil. That's where you'd build a settlement back in the day.
Exactly. So when they sprawl, they don't sprawl into a barren desert. They sprawl into prime agricultural land. We are quite literally paving over our own food source to build more driveways and cul-de-sacs.
That's such a sobering image, replacing cornfields with asphalt. And that asphalt leads us directly into the next major crisis highlighted in the blueprint, which is the temperature.
The urban heat island effect.
Yeah, I've definitely felt this. You walk downtown in August, and it feels like someone just opened a giant oven door in your face. And then you drive out to the countryside, and it drops like 10 degrees. I always just assumed it was, I don't know, better airflow out there.
A lot of people think that, but it's actually pure physics. The source material breaks this down into two main mechanisms, and they're really important to understand if you want to grasp urban engineering. The first mechanism is all about radiation.
This is the concrete acting like a giant battery, right?
Right. It's about absorption. Natural things like grass and trees reflect a fair amount of sunlight, but dark asphalt and concrete, they absorb it, they act like a massive thermal battery, they soak up solar energy all day long, and then at night, when the city is supposed to be cooling down, they just radiate that heat back out into the air.
So the city never gets a fever break. It's just constantly baking.
Exactly. And the second mechanism is about water. Think about a forest. When it rains, the soil absorbs the water. Then the plants basically sweat it out. It's called transpiration. And the ground evaporates it. That entire process actually consumes heat energy. It's nature's air conditioning.
But in a city, we've completely sealed off the ground.
We've totally waterproofed it. We deliberately designed cities to shed water as fast as possible into storm drains so the streets don't flood. But no water in the soil means no evaporation. And no evaporation means no cooling effect.
Man, so you combine the thermal battery of the concrete with the total lack of nature's AC, and you get this massive heat gradient, a really hot core and a cooler periphery.
And that extreme heat makes everything else worse. Particularly, it cooks the pollution.
Let's talk about that pollution, because the reading mentions Beijing heavily, but this applies to Los Angeles, Mexico City, really anywhere with a massive concentration of cars.
It does. When you concentrate millions of tailpipes and industrial stacks inside a heat island, you get photochemical smog. It's this toxic soup of ozone and particulates that literally destroys lung tissue. The text actually points out that in some rapidly industrializing cities, just breathing the air is equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day.
Wow. And that brings up a distinction the authors made that I found really helpful for understanding the global scale of this. The difference between core countries and peripheral countries when it comes to dealing with this infrastructure strain.
This is a crucial point. In a core country, meaning wealthy, highly developed nations, the infrastructure usually predates the latest population boom, or at least it has the budget to keep pace. You flush a toilet in New York City, it goes to a massive regulated treatment plant. It's managed.
But in the developing world,
Right. In peripheral countries, the urbanization is happening so incredibly fast. People are flooding into the city for work at unprecedented rates, and the local government physically cannot lay pipe fast enough. The organism is growing way faster than its own circulatory system.
so you end up with raw sewage in the streets, or it gets dumped directly into the exact same rivers that people are using for drinking water downstream.
Yeah, it's a massive infrastructure lag, and it turns what should be a basic logistical problem into a massive public health crisis. Diseases like cholera and dysentery, these aren't just historical footnotes. They are active threats in cities that are outgrowing their own blueprints.
Okay, so if we pause here for a second, the diagnosis of this organism is pretty terrifying. We have a beast that is eating up the best farmland, radiating heat like an industrial oven, choking on its own exhaust. and in a lot of places literally poisoning its own water supply.
Yeah, put like that, it sounds completely hopeless.
But the blueprint didn't stop there, thankfully. It pivoted to solutions. And this is what I want to spend the rest of our time on, the actual fixes. Because some of these strategies are really clever.
They are, but they do require us to think very differently about how cities are governed.
Right. So the first strategy is what I kind of started calling the team sport approach in my notes. Regional planning.
This addresses the fragmentation problem. See, pollution doesn't respect city limits. The smog generated in the downtown center just drifts over into the wealthy suburbs. The sewage dumped upstream flows right downstream to the next town. But traditionally, every little town and suburb has its own mayor, its own zoning board, and they do not talk to each other.
Right. The suburb wants to build a huge new shopping mall to get the tax revenue, even if it creates an absolute traffic nightmare for the city right next door. They just don't care.
Exactly. Regional planning tries to dissolve those invisible borders. It essentially says, look, we are one economic and ecological unit. We need to plan like one.
The Twin Cities, Minneapolis, and St. Paul were highlighted as the big hero story here.
They really are the gold standard in the U.S. for this approach. They realized decades ago that competing against each other was just hurting the whole region, so they created a metropolitan council with actual legislative teeth. They share tax revenue, they coordinate the mass transit across all the municipalities, and they manage the water table together.
And the text also mentioned Amsterdam doing something similar, right? Coordinating mass transit out to the edges and holding firm boundaries.
Yes, Amsterdam is a fantastic European example. By planning regionally, you can place high-speed transit exactly where it's needed rather than having the train tracks just arbitrarily stop at a county line.
And the result of all this wasn't just, better paperwork. The research mentioned it successfully encouraged something called urban infilling.
Which is really the antidote to sprawl. Instead of building out into the farmland, you build in. You find the empty lots, the abandoned gaps in the current city map, and you build there.
Which segues perfectly to the second strategy, and honestly, this was my favorite one to read about. Recycling the city. Dealing with brownfields.
Ugh, brownfields. It's an ugly word for a very ugly thing. These are basically the scars of the industrial age. Abandoned factories, old dry cleaners, defunct gas stations, sites that are just sitting empty and rotting because the ground is contaminated with oil, chemicals, or heavy metals.
The text calls them zones of abandonment, which, that sounds like a post-apocalyptic movie setting.
In many older industrial cities, they really do look like one. They absolutely kill surrounding property values, and they're dangerous. But the strategy here, called remediation, is about healing that land.
And this is the real aha moment of the blueprint. Because if you can actually clean up that massive old factory site downtown, you can build 500 new apartments right there. That means you don't have to build 500 apartments on a farm 20 miles away.
You're recycling the land itself. You're turning a massive toxic liability into your biggest asset.
The example they gave of the Paris Peninsula in France was super interesting, where they turned an old industrial site into a totally new district. But the one that really stood out to me was the Atlanta Beltline. I've actually been there, and I had no idea about its history.
Oh, it's a completely transformative project. Atlanta took a ring of old, decaying railroad corridors, classic textbook brownfields, and they didn't just clean them up. They turned them into this incredible linear park. It's a whole loop of walking and biking trails that connect dozens of neighborhoods.
And now it's not a zone of abandonment at all. It's like the trendiest place in the entire city. You have cafes, luxury condos, public art installations all along the trail.
Right, and it proves that environmental cleanup actually creates massive economic value. It draws people back into the city center, which immediately reduces the pressure to sprawl outward. It's a win-win.
Okay, so we have regional cooperation, and we have recycling toxic land. Now we have to talk about the strategy that brings the most drama to City Hall meetings, the tough love approach. Urban growth boundaries.
This is where we move away from nice incentives and get into strict regulations. An urban growth boundary, or UGB, is exactly what it sounds like. The regional government takes a marker, draws a hard line on the map around the city, and says urban development stops here. Past this line, it is rural, and it stays rural by law.
And this is often paired with the green belt, right? Like a literal ring of forest or open space where building is just flat out prohibited.
Correct. It acts as a permanent buffer. And the most famous case study for this in the U.S. is Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, Portland is legendary for this in urban planning circles. They drew that line way back in the 70s. And if you look at satellite photos today, you can actually see it. It's crazy. It's just city, density, and then a straight line. and then just dark green forest and farms. It's incredibly distinct.
And from a purely ecological standpoint, it worked brilliantly. It forced developers to look inward. It totally revitalized downtown Portland because that was literally the only place left you were legally allowed to build. And it saved the incredible farmland of the Willamette Valley.
But, and here is where we have to be critical, because the source material waves a really big red flag here. There is a massive, unintended consequence to drawing a hard wall around a growing city.
It's just basic economics. Supply and demand. If you have a growing population that desperately wants to move to Portland, but you artificially cap the supply of buildable land, what naturally happens to the price of housing?
It just skyrockets.
It skyrockets. And this is the great tension of modern urban planning. UGBs are fantastic at stopping sprawl, but they can easily create a devastating affordability crisis. If you restrict land to save the trees, you might inadvertently price out the teachers, the firefighters, the service workers.
Right. It's the paradox of smart growth. You end up with this beautiful, green, walkable, sustainable city that only wealthy tech executives can actually afford to live in.
And that forces the working class to move where? They have to move to the next town over, way past the Greenbelt, where housing is cheaper, which means they now have to commute even further to get to their jobs in the city. So if you aren't really careful, you just displace the sprawl and the emissions. You don't actually solve them.
That's such a crucial nuance. You can't just draw a line and call it a day. You have to couple that boundary with really aggressive, affordable housing policies inside the line.
Exactly. You have to build up. You need extreme density if you aren't going to build out. And the problem is people often fight density tooth and nail. They love the Greenbelt, but they don't want a 10-story apartment building going up next to their single-family home.
Right. The classic, not in my backyard crowd.
NIMBYism, yes. It's basically the mortal enemy of a successful urban growth boundary.
Man, so complex. But before we wrap up the strategies entirely, there was one final safeguard mentioned in the reading. Protecting the food supply explicitly.
Farmland protection policies. This is the legal framework, like the U.S. Farmland Protection Policy Act. It essentially puts a massive bureaucratic speed bump in front of any developer wanting to pave over a farm. It forces them to formally prove that the ecological cost of losing that high-quality soil is somehow justified by whatever subdivision they want to build.
It's a way of legally saying, hey, we recognize that soil is a strategic national resource, not just empty space waiting for a strip mall.
Which, when you bring it back to the organism metaphor we started with, is absolutely vital. An organism that casually destroys its own food source isn't going to survive very long.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've diagnosed the patient. The modern city is running dangerously hot. It's sprawling out of control, and it's incredibly thirsty. And we've looked at the medicine, regional planning, brownfield recycling, and growth boundaries.
And I think the big summary here is that we are in a state of really high tension right now. Everyone wants the economic and social benefits of the city, the jobs, the culture, the innovation. But we are finally realizing that the 20th century model of just building it cheap and spreading it out forever is basically a suicide pact in the long run.
And what's frustrating is it seems like we have the technology to fix it. We know how to remediate toxic soil now. We know how to build efficient light rail systems.
Oh, the barriers aren't technical anymore. They are almost entirely political and financial. It takes immense political will for a local mayor to say no to a massive developer just to honor some regional plan. And it takes massive upfront investment to clean up a brownfield before you see a single dime of return.
And like we talked about, it takes real courage to tell voters, hey, we need to build a massive apartment block in your quiet neighborhood so we don't have to pave over a farm 20 miles away.
That is definitely the hardest sell of all.
Well, I want to leave everyone listening with a thought that kind of haunted me after reading through all these sources. We talked a lot today about shrinking the ecological footprint. We talked about making the city sustainable.
Right.
But if we succeed, if we use all these incredible zoning tools and we actually build the perfect green, carbon-neutral city, but the cost of living there gets so astronomically high that the people who clean the streets, serve the coffee, and teach the kids have to commute in from 2 hours away every morning, is that city actually sustainable?
That is the ultimate question. Environmental sustainability without social equity really isn't sustainability at all. It's just the gated community with solar panels.
A gated community with solar panels, I think that is the perfect thought to chew on.
It's the defining challenge for the next generation of urban planners, for sure.
Well, that is it for this deep dive into the urban organism. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.